I never thought I'd catch my HOA president crawling through my home office window at 2 in the afternoon. But there she was, Sandra Bellwether, wearing her signature purple blazer with a homemade HOA president badge, had one leg through the window frame and was reaching for my filing cabinet with latex gloves on her hands. My wife, Sarah, stood in the doorway behind me, phone already pressed to her ear, calmly telling the 911 operator exactly what was happening, while Sandra remained completely oblivious to our presence. The whole nightmare started 6 months earlier, when Sarah and I moved into our dream home in Maple Ridge Estates. It was a beautiful colonial-style house with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees in the front yard. Everything seemed perfect until we met Sandra at our first HOA meeting. She stood at the podium like a general addressing troops, her voice sharp and commanding as she outlined the 147 rules of the neighborhood association. I should have known we were in trouble when she spent 20 minutes discussing the acceptable shade range for mailbox posts. Our first violation notice came exactly 1 week after we moved in. Apparently, our moving truck had left tire marks on the street that exceeded the acceptable darkness threshold outlined in Section 12(4) of the HOA bylaws. The fine was $75. Sarah laughed it off, saying it was probably just Sandra's way of establishing dominance with new residents. I paid the fine, thinking that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next month, we received violations for grass that was 1 in too tall, a garden hose that was visible from the street for more than 30 minutes, and curtains that were deemed an inappropriate shade of beige. Each violation came with increasingly steep fines, and each one was personally delivered by Sandra herself, always with a smug smile and a reminder that she had been HOA president for 12 years and knew what was best for property values. The real trouble began when I decided to install solar panels on our roof. I had done my research, filed all the proper paperwork with the city, and even checked the HOA bylaws to make sure there were no restrictions. Solar panels weren't mentioned anywhere in the documentation. I hired a reputable company and scheduled the installation for a Tuesday morning. Sandra must have been watching from her house across the street because she was at my door before the installers had even finished unloading their truck. She waved a piece of paper in my face with such force that her perfectly styled blonde hair actually moved. The paper was a cease and desist order that she had apparently typed up herself, complete with made-up legal jargon and references to bylaws that didn't exist. When I pointed out that solar panels weren't prohibited in the HOA rules, her face turned the color of an overripe tomato. She stammered something about architectural consistency and stormed off, but not before telling the installers that they were trespassing on HOA property. The installation went ahead as planned, but Sandra's campaign against us intensified. She started taking photos of our property at all hours, measuring the height of our decorative bushes with a ruler, and sending us violation notices for increasingly ridiculous infractions. She claimed our doorbell was too loud, our driveway was too shiny after we had it sealed, and that our recycling bins were positioned at an incorrect angle. The fines were adding up to thousands of dollars, all of which we refused to pay since none of the violations were legitimate. That's when Sandra decided to take matters into her own hands. She started spreading rumors at HOA meetings that we were running an illegal business from our home because she saw delivery trucks dropping off packages. The packages were actually just online shopping orders, but Sandra had convinced herself that we were operating some kind of underground commerce operation. She demanded to inspect our home, which we obviously refused. She threatened legal action, claiming she had the authority as HOA president to enter any property for inspection purposes. My wife Sarah, who works as a paralegal, knew this was completely false. She sent Sandra a formal letter outlining the actual limits of HOA authority and warning her against any further harassment. Sandra's response was to call an emergency HOA meeting where she tried to pass a motion giving herself inspection powers. The other residents, many of whom had their own stories about Sandra's overreach, voted it down overwhelmingly. That's when Sandra became desperate. She started leaving threatening notes on our door saying things like, "Non-compliant residents will be dealt with accordingly." And the HOA has ways of handling troublemakers. We installed security cameras which turned out to be the best decision we ever made. The cameras caught Sandra sneaking onto our property at night, trying to measure our solar panels with a ladder, and even attempting to paint our mailbox a different color to create a violation. The breaking point came when Sandra somehow convinced herself that if she could get possession of our property deed, she could use it to force us to comply with her made-up rules or even force us to sell. I know it sounds insane, and it was. She had been watching some sovereign citizen videos online and had completely misunderstood how property law works. She thought physical possession of the deed gave her some kind of legal power over our home, which brings us back to that Tuesday afternoon. I had come home early from work with a headache, and Sarah was working from home in her upstairs office. I heard a noise from my home office and went to investigate. There was Sandra halfway through, the window she had pried open with a crowbar, reaching for my filing cabinet, where she correctly assumed I kept important documents. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear me enter the room or noticed Sarah appearing behind me. Sarah's voice was perfectly calm as she spoke to the 911 operator. She said there was a break-in happening at our address and described Sandra in detail, including the purple blazer and the latex gloves. Sandra finally heard Sarah's voice and whipped around so fast she lost her balance and fell backward, landing half in and half out of the window. She started babbling about HOA authority and her right to inspect property documents, but the look of panic in her eyes showed she knew she had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. I stood there recording everything on my phone while Sandra tried to extract herself from the window. She managed to get back outside just as we heard the sirens approaching. She tried to run, but her heel got caught in our garden edging and she fell face first into the freshly mulched flower bed. By the time she got up, 2 police cars had pulled into our driveway and officers were approaching her with handcuffs. Sandra tried to explain to the officers that she was the HOA president and had authority to inspect our property. She actually pulled out her homemade badge and waved it at them like it was supposed to mean something. One of the officers looked at the badge, then at the broken window, then at Sandra covered in mulch, and just shook his head. They arrested her for breaking and entering, attempted burglary, and criminal trespass. As they led her to the police car, Sandra kept shouting about HOA bylaws and her 12 years of service to the community. She demanded that the officers call her lawyer, who turned out to be her nephew, who had just graduated from law school and had never handled a criminal case. The look on his face when he arrived at the scene and realized what his aunt had done was absolutely priceless. He actually apologized to us before following the police car to the station. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within hours, everyone knew that Sandra had been arrested for breaking into our home. An emergency HOA meeting was called for that evening, and the community room was packed. The vice president, a quiet accountant named Robert, ran the meeting and called for an immediate vote to remove Sandra from her position. The vote was unanimous, with even Sandra's usual supporters voting against her. The criminal case was swift and decisive. Our security footage, combined with Sarah's 911 call, and my video of Sandra in our window, made it an open and shut case. Sandra's nephew tried to argue that she believed she had legal authority as HOA president, but the judge wasn't having any of it. Sandra was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced Sandra to 18 months in prison, though she would likely serve less with good behavior and order her to pay $15,000 in restitution for the window, the damage to our property, and our legal fees. When the sentence was read, Sandra's jaw dropped open and she started crying, mumbling something about how she was just trying to protect property values. The bailiff led her away, still wearing her purple blazer, now rumpled and stained with mulch, as she kept repeating that she had been HOA president for 12 years, her voice cracking with disbelief at how her reign of terror had finally come to such an abrupt and humiliating end.